There are places where the wind moves differently, where even your footsteps seem reluctant to make a sound. Welcome back to Dead Quiet. Tonight, we're going deeper again into the Appalachian wilderness. 6 accounts. 6 people who went looking for peace, solitude, maybe healing, and found something else waiting instead. These aren't campfire tales. They're testimonies. From a photographer who realized she was being herded like prey. From friends who woke to bare footprints circling their tent in perfect silence. From a teenager alone in a farmhouse when something began imitating the voices of her dead. Some survived by luck, others by instinct. A few are still trying to make sense of what they saw. The Appalachians don't give answers easily. They're older than our cities, older than our certainties. And the further you go from the trailhead, the more you realize. Civilization is the exception, not the rule. Out there, different logic applies. Different things move through the trees. If you're here because the wilderness pulls at you the same way it does me, because you need to understand what lives in the margins, then stay. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next journey. This channel only grows because people like you choose to walk these paths with me. And I'm grateful you're here, because tonight, we're not just talking about missing persons reports or unexplained disappearances. We're talking about the 15 minutes before someone goes missing, the moment when everything shifts, when you realize the forest has been paying attention, and now it's your turn to be seen. So settle in, let the glow of the screen be the only light, and remember, in the wild, silence is never empty. Emma Chen had always believed that solitude was a gift, not a punishment. At 29, after ending an engagement that had slowly drained the color from her life, she needed space, the kind you can't find in Nashville coffee shops or therapy offices. She needed trees, miles of them. She needed the Smoky Mountains. September 2019. The kind of early fall where the air smells like approaching change, where the leaves are just beginning to consider turning. Emma had been planning this trip for months. A 5-day solo backpacking journey through one of the more remote sections of the Great Smoky Mountains. She'd done plenty of group hikes before, even a few overnight trips with her ex. But this would be her first truly solo expedition, and she was ready for it. The drive from Nashville took just under 4 hours. As the highway gave way to winding mountain roads, Emma felt something loosen in her chest. She'd packed meticulously. Tent, sleeping bag rated for 30 degrees, water filtration system, freeze-dried meals, first aid kit, bear spray, and her camera equipment. Photography had always been her meditation, her way of making sense of the world. Environmental photography specifically, capturing the moments when light hits water just right, when fog moves through valleys like something alive. She arrived at the trailhead around 10 in the morning. It wasn't one of the popular entry points. She'd chosen it specifically for that reason. Fewer people, more authentic wilderness. The parking area was just a widened shoulder of gravel road with space for maybe 4 vehicles. When she pulled in, there was already one truck there. An older model pickup, dark green, with a Confederate flag sticker peeling off the back window. Emma felt a small twist of unease, but pushed it aside. This was Appalachia. That sticker didn't necessarily mean anything. People had complicated relationships with symbols out here. She was pulling her pack from the trunk when she noticed him. A man, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, leaning against the truck's hood. He wasn't doing anything overtly threatening, just standing there, watching her. He wore hunting camouflage and had a rifle case visible in the truck bed behind him. "Morning," Emma called out, keeping her voice friendly but not inviting. He nodded slowly, didn't smile, just kept watching as she adjusted her pack straps, checked her hip belt, and locked her car. "Heading in alone?" he finally asked. His voice was flat, accent thick. "Meeting some friends about 6 miles in," Emma lied smoothly. It was a trick she'd learned from online hiking forums. Always imply you're expected somewhere, that people know where you are. The man's eyes moved over her gear with an assessment that felt too thorough. "That's a lot of camera equipment for a casual hike." "I'm a photographer," Emma said, slinging her pack on. It was heavy, probably 40 pounds, but she'd trained for it. Wildlife and landscapes. He nodded again, then said something that would echo in her mind for days afterward. "Lot of wildlife out there. Some of it ain't on 4 legs. Emma forced a laugh, gave a wave, and headed for the trailhead. She could feel his eyes on her back for the first 100 yards until the trail curved and the forest swallowed her whole. The first 2 days were everything she'd hoped for. The trail wound through old-growth forest, massive oaks and maples that had been standing since before her grandparents were born. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. She photographed mushrooms growing on fallen logs, a black bear in the distance, safely far away, and a waterfall that crashed over moss-covered rocks with such force she could feel the mist on her face from 20 feet back. She camped the first night near a stream, the sound of water her only company. She cooked ramen on her portable stove, added some jerky and dried vegetables, and felt more at peace than she had in months. The stars came out in numbers impossible to see in the city. She fell asleep to the sound of owls calling back and forth across the valley. Day 2 brought her deeper into the backcountry. She saw 2 other hikers early in the morning, a couple in their 60s, who were through hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail. They chatted briefly, shared trail conditions, and went their separate ways. After that, Emma had the forest to herself. By late afternoon, she was looking for a good place to set up camp for the second night. She wanted something with a view, maybe higher elevation. She found a promising area just off the trail, a small clearing with a flat spot perfect for her tent, and a fallen log she could use as a seat. She was setting up when she saw it. Hanging from a low branch, about 30 feet away, was a backpack. Not a whole backpack, a shredded one. The fabric was torn in long strips, like something with claws had gone at it systematically. The straps were still intact, still tied to the branch, but the main compartment was gutted. Emma approached slowly, her heart rate picking up. The pack was women's. She could tell by the size and the purple accents still visible on the straps. As she got closer, she saw something that made her stomach drop. A wallet, lying in the leaves beneath the pack. She picked it up with shaking hands. Inside was a driver's license. Sarah Mitchell, age 32, from Knoxville. The license had expired in 2017, 2 years ago. Emma looked around the clearing with new eyes. This wasn't random. Someone had hung this pack here deliberately. A warning, a trophy. She should leave. She knew that immediately. But the photographer in her, the part that documented things, made her take photos first. Evidence, just in case. She decided to set up camp anyway. It was already getting toward evening, and the next good camping spot was probably miles away. Besides, whatever had happened to Sarah Mitchell's backpack had happened years ago. Emma had bear spray. She had a whistle. She'd be fine. She set up her tent at the far end of the clearing, as far from the hanging pack as possible. She filtered water from a nearby stream, ate a quick dinner of dehydrated pasta, and tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over her. As the sun began to set, Emma decided to walk the perimeter of the clearing, just to familiarize herself with the area. It was a habit she'd developed, Know your surroundings. Know your exit routes. That's when she found the wire. It was stretched between two trees at about ankle height, thin and nearly invisible. She only noticed it because she'd bent down to examine some interesting fungi, and the dying sunlight caught the wire at just the right angle, making it glint. Emma's breath caught. This wasn't old. The wire was clean, not rusted. And when she followed it with her eyes, she saw where it led. To a pulley system rigged in the branches above. Her hands were shaking as she traced the mechanism. Someone had set this up recently. A tripwire that, when triggered, would release. What? She couldn't see what was attached without climbing, and there was no way she was doing that. She pulled out her multi-tool and cut the wire. The tension released with a soft twang. Whatever this trap was meant to do, it wouldn't do it now. Emma walked quickly back to her tent. The sun was almost down. She needed to think. She needed to. Her tent was open. She had zipped it. She was absolutely certain she had zipped it. You don't leave a tent open in bear country. It's the first rule of camping. Emma approached slowly, her bear spray in hand. She opened the tent flap wider. Her satellite phone was gone. It had been in the outer pocket of her pack, and now it wasn't there. She tore through everything: sleeping bag, clothes, food bag. The phone was definitely gone. Someone had been here. While she was examining the wire, someone had gone through her tent and taken the one piece of equipment that would let her call for help. The forest was getting dark fast. Emma's mind raced. She was at least 10 miles from the nearest trailhead. Her car keys were still in her pocket. She checked frantically. Yes, still there. But her phone was gone. She couldn't stay here. Every instinct screamed at her to move. Emma packed faster than she ever had in her life. She didn't bother folding anything, just shoved gear into her pack, took down her tent with shaking hands, and got ready to hike. She'd hike through the night if she had to. Anything was better than staying in this clearing. She was shouldering her pack when she heard it. A branch breaking, not close, but not far enough away either. Somewhere in the darkening trees, something was moving. Emma ran. Not down the trail. She didn't trust the trail anymore. If someone was tracking her, they'd expect her to follow the established path. Instead, she crashed through the underbrush perpendicular to the trail, using her headlamp to avoid trees, moving as fast as the heavy pack would allow. She could hear her breath ragged in her ears, could feel branches scratching her face and arms. She didn't care. She just needed distance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Emma stopped. She turned off her headlamp and listened. The forest was silent. No footsteps, no breaking branches. Just the normal sounds of night. Insects, wind, the distant call of an owl. Maybe she'd overreacted. Maybe she'd gotten far enough away. Maybe. She turned her headlamp back on and swept it across her surroundings. She needed to figure out where she was, which direction to go. That's when the beam caught something that made her blood freeze. Another wire, stretched between trees not 15 feet from where she stood. This one was different, thicker, and it led to something she could actually see, a pit covered with branches and leaves. A pit trap. Emma walked around it carefully, shining her light down into the hole. It was deep, maybe 8 feet, and at the bottom were sharpened stakes driven into the ground at angles. This wasn't for animals. Animals don't need pit traps this elaborate. This was designed to catch a person. She was being herded. The realization hit her like cold water. The hanging backpack, the first wire she'd found, they were breadcrumbs, designed to move her in a specific direction, away from the main trail, into an area where someone had set up a killing ground. Emma's fear transformed into something sharper. Anger. She refused to be prey. She pulled out her map and compass, oriented herself. If she was where she thought she was, there should be a seasonal creek about half a mile to the east. If she followed that downstream, it would eventually intersect with a fire road. From there, she could find her way to civilization. She started moving again, but this time with more care, checking the ground ahead before each step, stopping every few minutes to listen. The night was endless. Emma's legs burned, her pack straps dug into her shoulders, but she kept moving, following the sound of water until she found the creek, then following the creek downhill. At some point, exhaustion caught up with her, as the first grey light of dawn started filtering through the trees. Emma found a dense thicket of rhododendron and crawled into the center of it. She couldn't go any further without rest. The thicket would hide her, and she could hear anyone approaching through the dry leaves. She set her pack down, wedged herself between the gnarled trunks, and closed her eyes. Just a few minutes, just enough to take the edge off. She woke to full sunlight and the sound of voices. Emma's heart hammered as she listened. Male voices, plural, speaking low, moving through the forest with purpose. Tracks went this way. Couldn't have gotten far with that pack. They were hunting her, actually hunting her. Emma stayed absolutely still. The rhododendron thicket was dense enough that unless they were specifically looking into it, they might not see her. She watched through the leaves as two men passed within 20 feet of her hiding spot. One of them was the man from the parking lot. She recognized his camouflage pattern, his build. The other was younger, wearing similar gear. They both carried rifles. They paused so close she could hear their breathing. The older man crouched, examining the ground. She's smart. Stayed off the trail. But she went this way. See the broken ferns? How long you want to keep looking? The younger man asked. He sounded bored. Long as it takes, the older one replied. She's seen too much, and besides, he smiled, and it was the worst smile Emma had ever seen. I like the ones who run. They moved on. Emma waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then waited another hour to be sure. When she finally emerged from the thicket, she moved like a ghost. No more crashing through the brush. Slow, careful, placing each foot deliberately. She found the creek again and followed it downstream. By noon, she could hear something in the distance. Not water, engines, a road. Emma pushed herself harder. The creek eventually led her to a fire road, rutted, overgrown, but definitely maintained by humans. She followed it for another mile until it connected to a larger dirt road. And there, like a miracle, was a family. 2 parents, 3 kids, setting up for a picnic at a roadside pull-off. They had a car. They had a cell phone. Emma stumbled toward them, and the mother screamed. Emma realized what she must look like, scratched, dirty, wild-eyed. But she didn't care. Please, she said, I need to call the police. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately frustrating. Park rangers and police combed the area where Emma had camped. They found the pit trap, exactly where she described. They found 2 more pits she hadn't seen. They found the shredded backpack, which was indeed Sarah Mitchell's. Sarah had been reported missing in 2017 while hiking alone in the Smokies. They found the tripwire Emma had cut. And they found something else. A 5th pit trap, the most elaborate one. At the bottom, along with the sharpened stakes, were rope and duct tape. Restraints. The truck at the trailhead was registered to a local man named Dale Hendricks. When police went to question him, his house was empty. He'd cleared out, clothes gone, weapons gone, truck gone. A neighbor said she'd seen him leave with his nephew the day after Emma escaped. They never found Dale Hendricks or his nephew. An arrest warrant was issued, but as of today, 5 years later, they remain at large. What police did find in Hendricks's abandoned house was a box of driver's licenses and ID cards, 11 of them, all women. Sarah Mitchell's was among them. 8 of those women were still officially listed as missing persons. The other 3 had been found dead years earlier in remote areas, their deaths attributed to animal attacks or exposure. Emma moved to Colorado 3 months after her escape. She still hikes, but never in the southeast, never alone, and never, ever, without a personal locator beacon that she checks obsessively. She thinks about Sarah Mitchell sometimes, about the other names on those IDs, about how many didn't make it out of Dale Hendrix's hunting ground. But mostly, she thinks about that smile, the one that said running made it more fun for him, because some people don't go into the wilderness to find peace. They go there because it's the one place they can be what they really are, and the forest keeps their secrets. The Park Service quietly increased patrols in that area. Local hiking forums share warnings about that particular trailhead, though they can't say officially why. And 7 women reported similar encounters in various parts of the Smokies between 2017 and 2023. Always the same pattern. A man at the trailhead who watches too carefully. A feeling of being followed. Traps found just off the trail. The cases were never connected. Not officially. Emma wonders how many others there were who didn't report it, who convinced themselves it was nothing, or who never made it out to report at all. She keeps a folder on her laptop. News articles about missing hikers in the Appalachians. The numbers are higher than most people realize. Not all of them are accidents. Not all of them are people who got lost. Some of them were found. There's a difference between being watched by an animal and being watched by something that understands what you are. Tyler Morrison learned that difference in April 2021, in a part of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the cell signal dies and the trail markers thin out until you're navigating by instinct and topography alone. Tyler was 31, a high school biology teacher from Charlotte with a passion for mycology, the study of fungi. His apartment was filled with field guides. His weekends often spent photographing mushrooms in various states of decay and bloom. It was a hobby that made sense to him. Fungi were the decomposers, the unseen network that connected the forest floor, breaking down death and turning it into new life. He'd invited 3 of his closest friends for a 4-day camping trip. Brandon Lee, his college roommate, who now worked as an ER nurse. Ashley Porter, Brandon's girlfriend and a rock climbing instructor who could scale a cliff face like gravity was optional. And Kevin Walsh, Tyler's cousin, a construction worker with a laugh that carried across valleys. They'd picked the Blue Ridge Mountains specifically because none of them had explored that section before. The plan was simple: hike into a primitive camping area about 12 miles from the nearest road, set up a base camp, and spend a few days exploring the surrounding area. It was Tyler's 31st birthday, and this was how he wanted to celebrate: away from screens, away from schedules, just 4 friends in the wilderness. They started the hike on a Thursday morning in mid-April. The weather was perfect, cool enough for comfortable hiking, warm enough that they didn't need heavy layers. Spring was asserting itself in the mountains. Wildflowers dotted the trail, and the trees were that specific shade of new leaf green that only lasts a few weeks. The trail wound upward through mixed hardwood forest. They made good time, stopping occasionally for water breaks or so. Tyler could photograph a particularly interesting bracket fungus growing on a fallen oak. Ashley took photos too, but hers were of the landscape, dramatic rock formations, views across ridgelines that seemed to go on forever. By late afternoon, they'd reached the camping area. It wasn't much, just a flat spot near a stream, with a fire ring made of stacked stones, and enough cleared ground for 2 or 3 tents. The isolation was what they'd come for. No other campers, No sounds of civilization, just the whisper of wind through new leaves and the gurgle of water over rocks. They set up camp efficiently, Tyler and Kevin in one tent, Brandon and Ashley in the other. They gathered firewood, filtered water from the stream, and as the sun started its descent, Brandon pulled out the ingredients for an elaborate outdoor meal. Dehydrated chili that he'd rehydrated with filtered water, instant rice, tortillas, and a bag of shredded cheese he'd packed in at the bottom of his cooler pack. The first night was perfect. They sat around the fire, talking and laughing. Brandon told stories from the ER, the things people come in with, the excuses they give. Ashley described her worst climbing students, the ones who freeze on the wall and have to be talked down inch by inch. Kevin shared construction site humor that was probably funnier because of the beers they'd packed in. Tyler felt that specific kind of contentment that only comes from being exactly where you want to be, with exactly the people you want to be with. The stars came out in force. No light pollution this far from anything, just the Milky Way stretching across the sky like someone had spilled milk across black velvet. Around midnight, they banked the fire and retreated to their tents. Tyler fell asleep to the sound of the stream and the occasional pop of settling embers. He woke to Kevin shaking his shoulder. It was just past dawn, that gray period before the sun actually crests the horizon. Kevin's face was tight, his usual easy expression replaced with something Tyler had rarely seen on his cousin. Genuine discomfort. "You need to see this," Kevin said quietly. Tyler crawled out of his sleeping bag, shoved his feet into his boots without bothering to tie them, and followed Kevin outside. Brandon and Ashley were already out of their tent, standing at the edge of the campsite, staring at the ground. The prints were everywhere, dozens of them, forming a perfect circle around where they'd slept. Barefoot prints, human-shaped but wrong. Tyler crouched down to examine the closest one. The toes were too long, elongated, almost like fingers. The arch was pronounced in a way that didn't match any footprint he'd seen before. And the stride pattern, they were small prints, maybe a women's size 5 or 6, but the distance between steps suggested something with a longer gait. "What the hell?" Ashley said softly. Brandon was already walking the perimeter, counting. "Looks like at least 3 different individuals, maybe 4. They circled us multiple times." Tyler's analytical mind kicked in. "Did anyone hear anything last night? Footsteps? Voices?" They all shook their heads. The camp had been silent, and that was what disturbed Tyler most. The ground was damp from recent rain. It would have made sounds if someone was walking on it, but none of them had heard a thing. Kevin pointed to one set of prints. These came from that direction, walked all the way around, then went back the same way. Tyler followed the prints with his eyes. They led into the forest, disappearing into the understory about 30 feet away. He thought about following them, then decided against it. Something about this felt off. Could be local kids, Brandon offered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "This far from any town?" Ashley countered. "And walking barefoot, in the middle of the night?" They stood in silence, looking at the circle of prints. Tyler thought about things he'd read online, the folklore of Appalachia, stories of feral people living in the deep woods. He'd always dismissed them as urban legends, the kind of stories that get passed around to scare tourists. But here were the footprints. Undeniable. Real. "Let's pack up and move camp," Kevin said. "I don't like this." It was the most sensible suggestion. They broke camp quickly, efficiently, not bothering with breakfast. The plan was to hike about 5 miles to a different area, set up there, and try to salvage the trip. As they hiked, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept looking back over his shoulder, scanning the tree line. Once, he could have sworn he saw movement. a figure ducking behind a large oak about 100 yards upslope. But when he stopped and really looked, there was nothing there. "You okay?" Ashley asked, noticing he'd fallen behind. "Yeah," Tyler lied. "Just thought I saw a deer." They found a new campsite by early afternoon, a more open area with better sightlines, though still isolated. They set up the tents again, this time positioning them so their backs were against a large rock outcropping. It felt more defensible, though Tyler didn't want to think too hard about why that mattered. The day passed uneasily. They went through the motions of camping, filtered water, set up the bear bag, gathered firewood. But the easy camaraderie from the first day was gone, replaced by a watchful tension. They built a larger fire than necessary, and when darkness came, no one suggested going to bed early. They agreed on watch rotations. Tyler would take the first shift, 10 p.m. to midnight. Brandon would take midnight to 2 a.m. Kevin would take 2 to 4. Ashley would take the final shift until dawn. Tyler sat by the fire, feeding it sticks to keep the flames high. The forest at night was usually alive with sound. Owls, insects, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. But tonight, it was quiet, too quiet, like the normal inhabitants had decided to be elsewhere. At 11:30, Tyler heard it, a soft whistling sound, almost melodic. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing through the trees. He stood up, grabbing the flashlight from his belt. The whistling stopped. Tyler waited, barely breathing. After a few minutes of silence, he convinced himself he'd imagined it. Nerves and isolation playing tricks on his mind. At midnight, he woke Brandon for the next shift. "Anything happen?" Brandon asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Thought I heard whistling," Tyler admitted, "but it stopped. Probably just whined through the rocks." Brandon nodded and took up position by the fire. Tyler crawled into his tent, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay there, listening to the crackle of the fire, to Brandon occasionally shifting position outside. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, Kevin was shaking his shoulder urgently. Tyler sat up, disoriented. Through the tent's mesh window, he could see the sky was still dark, not even close to dawn. "What's wrong?" Tyler whispered. "Brandon's gone," Kevin said. His voice was tight with controlled panic. "His tent is empty. Sleeping bag is cold." Tyler's heart kicked into overdrive. He scrambled out of his sleeping bag, shoved his feet into his boots, and emerged into the firelit clearing. Ashley was already up, wild-eyed, holding a flashlight. Brandon's tent was indeed empty. His sleeping bag was unzipped, lying half out of the tent like he'd left in a hurry, or like he'd been pulled. "Brandon!" Ashley called out, not bothering to keep her voice down. "Brandon!" No response. Just the crackling of the fire and that oppressive silence pressing in from the darkness beyond their camp. Tyler grabbed his own flashlight and started examining the ground. There, footprints. Barefoot again, but this time mixed with the tread pattern of Brandon's hiking boots. The tracks led away from camp into the forest. "We have to go after him," Ashley said immediately. Tyler knew she was right, but every survival instinct he had was screaming that this was a trap. Still, Brandon was family, not by blood, but by choice. They couldn't just leave him. "We stay together," Tyler said firmly. "No one separates. We find him, we bring him back, and then we hike out of here at first light. Agreed?" They all agreed. They followed the tracks into the forest, 3 flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The prints wound through the trees in a pattern that made no sense, doubling back, spiraling, crossing over themselves. It was like Brandon had been walking in circles, or being led in circles. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they found him. Brandon was standing in a small clearing, facing away from them. He was perfectly still, arms at his sides, just staring at a large oak tree about 10 feet in front of him. "Brandon!" Ashley rushed forward, but Tyler grabbed her arm. "Wait," he said softly. There was something wrong about the way Brandon was standing. Too still, like a statue. Tyler approached slowly, keeping his flashlight beam low so as not to startle him. "Brandon, buddy, you okay?" No response. Tyler reached out and touched Brandon's shoulder. The moment he made contact, Brandon collapsed, just dropped straight down like someone had cut his strings. They caught him before he hit the ground. His eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated. He was conscious but not present, looking through them rather than at them. "Brandon, can you hear me?" Ashley's voice was breaking. She was a strong person, one of the toughest people Tyler knew, but seeing her boyfriend like this was clearly shaking her to the core. Brandon's lips moved. He was trying to say something. Tyler leaned in close. "So many voices," Brandon whispered, "all calling my name." It took all three of them to get Brandon back to camp. He could walk, but only if they guided him. He kept trying to wander off in random directions, like a compass with a broken needle. By the time they got him back to the fire, the sun was starting to lighten the eastern sky. Brandon seemed to come back to himself gradually, like someone waking from a deep sleep. "What happened?" he asked, looking around confused. "Why are we all up? Whose watch is it?" "You don't remember?" Kevin asked carefully. Brandon shook his head. He looked at their faces, saw the fear there, and his own expression shifted to concern. "What did I do?" They told him about finding him gone, about the tracks, about finding him standing in the clearing, staring at nothing. Brandon went pale. "I don't remember any of that. The last thing I remember is you waking me for watch duty, Tyler. After that, nothing. Like someone just erased the last few hours." They didn't wait for full daylight. They packed up everything as quickly as possible, stomped out the fire, and started hiking back toward the trailhead. The plan was abandoned. The birthday celebration was over. They just wanted out. But the forest had other ideas. The trail should have been easy to follow. They'd marked it on their GPS units, and they'd hiked it just yesterday. But this morning, the markers they'd been following were gone. Not faded or overgrown, actually removed. Recent cuts on trees where blazes had been. Cairns of stones kicked over. Tyler pulled out his GPS unit. According to it, they were walking in the right direction. But an hour of walking should have brought them to a specific landmark. A distinctive rock formation, shaped like a split tooth. They never reached it. Instead, they found themselves back at their campsite, the same rock outcropping, the same fire ring still warm from their morning fire. "That's impossible," Kevin said flatly. "We walked in a straight line. We checked the compass." They tried again, different direction this time. Tyler leading with the GPS, Ashley behind him, checking a backup compass. 2 hours of hiking, and they ended up back at the same campsite. On the third try, Brandon started crying, not sobbing, just tears silently running down his face. "Something doesn't want us to leave," he said. Ashley pulled him close. "That's crazy. We're just turned around, disoriented." But Tyler could see she didn't believe her own words. It was Kevin who suggested they just pick a direction and keep walking, regardless of what the GPS said. "We know these mountains run east-west. If we head due north, we'll eventually hit a road or a trail or something. We just keep walking until we find civilization." It was desperate logic, but it was logic. They started north, using the sun to orient themselves. By mid-afternoon, exhausted and dehydrated, they finally heard something that made them want to cry with relief. Traffic. The distant sound of cars on asphalt. They pushed through the last stretch of forest and emerged onto a highway. A real paved highway with lane markers and a mile marker sign. They were roughly 40 miles from where they thought they were. The GPS had been completely wrong, or something had been interfering with it. Either way, they were out. A passing motorist stopped when they flagged her down. A woman in her 60s who took one look at their faces and immediately pulled over. She drove them to the nearest town, a small place called Creston, where they called for a ride back to their cars. At the local diner, waiting for their ride, Tyler pulled up a map on his phone. He found their original camping area, then traced where they'd been hiking. The area was marked with a small notation: closed to camping, ongoing wildlife management. Wildlife management, Tyler repeated slowly. You think that's what they call it? Before they left Creston, Tyler spoke with a park ranger at a small Forest Service office. The ranger, an older man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen things, listened to their story without interruption. When Tyler finished, the ranger was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the third group this month to report something similar in that area." "What's going on out there?" Tyler asked. The ranger shook his head. "Ongoing investigation. That's all I can tell you." "That's not good enough," Ashley said sharply. "My boyfriend was... something happened to him. He lost hours of memory. We all saw..." "I know what you saw," the ranger interrupted gently. "And I'm telling you, it's being investigated. In the meantime, that area is restricted. No camping, no hiking. We've got signs posted at all the main access points." "But not at the trailhead we used," Kevin pointed out. The ranger's jaw tightened. "I'll get someone out there today." They never got more information than that. Tyler tried to file a formal report, but was told it would be added to the existing case file and they'd be contacted if any follow-up was needed. No one ever contacted them. Back in Charlotte, the nightmares started. Tyler would wake up convinced he was back in that forest, hearing the whistling sounds, seeing shapes moving between trees. Brandon required medical leave from his nursing job. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. The missing hours of memory haunted him. Ashley and Kevin seemed to cope better, but Tyler noticed they never suggested camping trips anymore. The group that had been so close, that had spent every few months planning their next adventure, quietly drifted apart. Not from any conflict, but from a shared trauma that no one wanted to talk about. Tyler started researching. He created a private spreadsheet, tracking online reports of similar encounters in Appalachia. He found patterns: the whistling, the circling, the time distortion, missing hours, people finding themselves miles from where they should be, with no memory of how they got there. He found 47 similar reports across 6 states, dating back to 2003, all in remote areas of the Appalachian Mountains, all dismissed as people getting lost, or sleep deprivation, or mass hysteria. But Tyler knew what he'd seen, knew what they'd all experienced. 3 months after their trip, Tyler found a forum post that made his blood run cold. It was from a user named Ranger_Tom, and it was posted to a discussion board for current and former Forest Service employees. The post read, "Anyone else getting the directive to not escalate encounters in Zone 7? We've got multiple civilian reports of non-aggressive contact, but the regional office keeps shutting down investigation requests. Someone want to tell me what we're supposed to do when hikers report the same pattern 6 times in 2 months, starting to feel like we're letting people walk into something we know is there." The post had been deleted within hours. Tyler had only seen it because he'd set up alerts for specific keywords. He tried to reach out to Ranger_Tom, but the account had been deactivated. Tyler thinks about that deleted post a lot, about what non-aggressive contact means, about what something we know is there implies. Because whatever was in those woods whatever circled their camp and led Brandon into the forest. The Park Service knew about it, and they'd decided not to tell anyone. Last month, Tyler found a new report. A group of hikers in the same area, same experience, circling prints, missing time. One member of their group wandering off and being found miles away with no memory. The report was filed by a man named Robert Chen. No relation to Emma from our last story, but the name stuck with Tyler, because in the report, Robert mentioned that this was his second time experiencing the phenomenon. He'd gone back into the woods looking for answers. Tyler reached out to Robert through the hiking forum where the report was posted. Robert replied once, "They're not dangerous. They're curious. I'm going back to try to communicate." That was 3 weeks ago. Robert hasn't posted since. And when Tyler called the local authorities to ask about Robert Chen, they said no one by that name had filed any reports with them. The rabbit hole goes deeper than Tyler wants to admit. But he keeps digging. Because whatever is out there in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it's real. And silence, he's learned, is never just silence. Sometimes it's the space where something is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. Long pause, wind sounds. Tyler still has the photos he took on that trip, the spring wildflowers, the bracket fungi, and one photo he didn't realize he'd taken until he reviewed his camera roll weeks later. It's from the first morning, when they discovered the footprints. Tyler had been photographing the prints for documentation, but in the background, barely visible in the tree line, there's a shape, blurred like it moved during the exposure, but unmistakably bipedal, unmistakably watching. He's never shown that photo to anyone. He tells himself it's because people wouldn't believe him. But the truth is simpler and more frightening. He doesn't want to see it himself, doesn't want to confirm what he knows in his gut, that they were never alone in those mountains, and something is still watching. Sofia Martinez was 16 years old when she learned that the worst kind of fear isn't the fear of what you can see. It's the fear of what sounds exactly like someone you love. She'd been living with her Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard for 3 years, ever since the car accident that took her parents. The accident itself was a blur in her memory. She'd been 13, sitting in the back seat, and then there was screaming and the sound of metal tearing, and then white hospital lights and her aunt's face telling her things that didn't make sense. Her parents were gone, both of them. Instantly, the police said. They didn't suffer, her aunt promised, though Sophia didn't know if that was true or just something adults said to make unbearable things slightly more bearable. Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard lived in eastern Kentucky, in the foothills of the Appalachians. Their farmhouse sat on 40 acres that backed up to dense forest, the kind of forest where the trees are so thick that even at noon, the understory is dim and cool. The nearest neighbor was the Hendersons, a retired couple who lived 2 miles down the road. It was isolated, but Sophia had grown to appreciate the quiet. She was an artistic kid, always sketching in her journal, and the solitude gave her space to process her grief in her own way. She struggled with anxiety. Her therapist said it was normal after trauma, but out here, away from the chaos of her old suburban life, she'd found a kind of peace. Uncle Richard was a good man, gruff, didn't talk much, but he'd converted the spare room into a proper bedroom for Sophia, even built her a custom desk where she could draw and do homework. Aunt Linda was warmer, always making sure Sophia ate enough, always asking about school, sometimes too much, but from a place of love. They had rules, though, specific rules that Uncle Richard insisted on, especially when it came to being home alone. Lock all the doors, every single one. Don't answer for anyone, I don't care who they say they are, and stay inside after dark. I mean it, Sophia. Those aren't suggestions. Sophia would roll her eyes, but she followed the rules. She wasn't stupid. She'd heard enough news stories about rural break-ins, and she'd seen enough true crime shows to know that isolated houses were targets. October 2018. A Friday night. Uncle Richard and Aunt Linda were invited to a wedding in Louisville. A colleague of Richard's from the auto shop where he worked. It would be a 2-day trip. Drive up Friday evening, attend the wedding Saturday, drive back Sunday afternoon. They'd asked Sophia if she wanted to come, but she'd declined. She had homework. And honestly, the idea of a weekend alone in the house was appealing. She was 16, not a child. She could handle it. "You're sure?" Aunt Linda asked for the third time, standing in the doorway with her overnight bag. "I'm sure," Sophia said, looking up from her sketchbook. "I'll be fine. I've got pizza money. I've got Netflix. I'll be asleep by midnight." Uncle Richard appeared behind Linda, his face serious. He went through the rules again, all of them, including the ones Sophia had heard 100 times. "And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call 911 first, then you call us. Don't hesitate. Don't try to handle it yourself." "I know, Uncle Richard. I promise." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, we'll be back Sunday, around 3 or 4. You need anything before that, you call the Hendersons." They left around 5:30. Sophia watched from the window as their Subaru disappeared down the long gravel driveway, then turned onto the main road and vanished into the October dusk. The house felt bigger when she was alone, not in a bad way, just noticeable. The creaks and settles that you normally don't pay attention to become more pronounced when you're the only person there to hear them. Sophia ordered pizza from the place in town that delivered out this far. They knew the address, knew to come all the way up the driveway, because the house wasn't visible from the road. The delivery guy was the same teenager who delivered before, and he handed over the pizza without much conversation, took his tip, and left. She ate 3 slices in front of Netflix, watching a show she'd been binging about teenagers with supernatural powers. It was exactly the kind of escapism she needed. By 11 p.m., she'd finished her homework, done some drawing, and was starting to feel tired. She made one more round of the house, checking that all the doors were locked, all the windows secure. The basement door, that one always made her nervous. It led down to an unfinished space where the furnace and water heater lived, but also where there was an exterior door that led to the backyard. She tugged on it. Locked. Of course it was locked. She checked it an hour ago, but she checked again anyway, then pushed the heavy bookshelf that Uncle Richard kept nearby a few inches closer, just for extra security. Upstairs she brushed her teeth, changed into sleep clothes, and climbed into bed with her phone. She scrolled through social media for a while, liking friends' posts, looking at photos from lives that seemed so far removed from hers. Around 11:30, she heard the creak. Old houses creak. Sophia knew this intellectually. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. Floors settle. It didn't mean anything, but this creak was different. It sounded like it came from the basement, like a door opening slowly on hinges that needed oil. Sophia sat up in bed, listening. Her heart was beating faster, but she told herself to calm down. She was being paranoid. The house made sounds. That's what houses did. She waited, barely breathing. Another creak, definitely from downstairs. Sophia grabbed her phone and the baseball bat she kept beside her bed. Uncle Richard had given it to her for exactly this purpose, just in case, and crept out into the hallway. The house was dark except for the nightlight in the hallway. She moved to the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness of the first floor. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small and scared. which made her angry at herself. Silence. She descended the stairs slowly, bat gripped in both hands. At the bottom, she turned on the living room light. Everything looked normal. The pizza box was still on the coffee table. The TV was off. Nothing was disturbed. She moved through the first floor methodically, turning on lights as she went. Kitchen. Empty. Living room. Empty. Dining room. Empty. Then she reached the basement door. It was open. Not wide open, but ajar. Maybe 6 inches, enough to see darkness beyond, enough to let cold air from the basement drift up into the first floor. Sophia's mouth went dry. She had locked that door. She had checked it twice. She had pushed the bookshelf closer to it. The bookshelf was now 3 feet away from the door, like someone had moved it aside. "Hello?" she called again, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She approached the door slowly. With the bat raised, she pushed it open wider and fumbled for the basement light switch. The light flickered on, illuminating the concrete stairs that led down into the unfinished space. She descended 3 steps, enough to see most of the basement. It was empty, just the furnace humming quietly, the water heater, boxes of storage, the washer and dryer in the corner. But the exterior basement door, the one that led to the backyard, was open. Sophia's fear crystallized into something sharp and cold. She had locked that door. She was absolutely certain. It was one of Uncle Richard's main rules. Always lock the basement exterior door because it's the most vulnerable entry point to the house. She went down the rest of the stairs on shaky legs. The door wasn't just unlocked. It was standing open, letting in the October night air. Had she forgotten to lock it? No, she'd checked. Multiple times. Could the lock be broken? She examined it. It looked fine. Functional. Which meant someone had opened it from the inside. Sophia slammed the door shut and twisted the deadbolt so hard her fingers hurt. Then, she grabbed the heavy shelf that Uncle Richard kept down there, the one with old paint cans, and shoved it against the door with strength she didn't know she had. She ran back upstairs, her heart hammering. Back in the main floor, she deadbolted the basement door from her side and pushed the bookshelf back against it. Then she went to every window on the first floor and made sure they were locked. Then she checked the front door, then the back door off the kitchen. Everything was secure, but someone had been in the house. Someone had opened that basement door, or had she really locked it? Suddenly, she couldn't remember. She thought she had, but what if the anxiety was making her paranoid? What if she was remembering checking it when she hadn't actually checked it? Sophia went back to her bedroom and locked that door too. Uncle Richard had removed the keys to bedroom doors when they moved in. He said it was a safety thing, that people should never lock bedroom doors in case of emergency. But the lock mechanism still worked if you pushed the button on the knob. She sat on her bed, bat across her lap, and tried to calm her breathing. She was being ridiculous. The door had been unlocked. Maybe the lock was faulty, and it had just swung open. Maybe she'd done a bad job locking it. There was no evidence anyone had actually been in the house. Her phone said it was 11:47 p.m. She thought about calling her aunt and uncle, but what would she even say? "Hi, I think I maybe forgot to lock a door and now I'm scared." They'd tell her to calm down, maybe call the Hendersons if she was really worried. She tried calling the Hendersons. No answer. It was almost midnight. They were probably asleep. She tried to call 911, but there was no signal. That happened sometimes out here. The coverage was spotty, and depending on weather conditions, you could lose service entirely. No signal meant she couldn't call anyone. Sophia pulled her blankets up around her and tried to convince herself she was safe. She had locked everything now. Even if she'd forgotten before, everything was locked now. No one could get in. She was just starting to relax, her breathing finally slowing, when she heard it. A voice, soft, coming from somewhere in the house. "Sophia!" The voice was feminine, gentle, calling her name like a question. It was her mother's voice. Sophia's entire body went rigid. That was impossible. Her mother was dead, had been dead for 3 years. "Sophia, honey." The voice was coming from the heating vent in her bedroom, the one connected to the basement. Her mother's voice, exactly as she remembered it. The slight accent, the way she'd always drawn out Sophia's name into 3 melodic syllables. "Come downstairs, sweetheart." Tears started flowing down Sophia's face before she even realized she was crying. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it sounded so exactly like her mother that for a moment Sophia almost believed. "I'm cold, honey. Please let me in." The words broke the spell. Let me in. Her mother wasn't asking to be let in. Her mother was gone. Someone was using her mother's voice. Someone was down in the basement, speaking through the heating vents, imitating her dead mother. The cruelty of it hit Sophia like a physical blow. Someone was weaponizing her grief, using her trauma against her. Sophia, the voice again. But this time there was an edge to it, an impatience that her mother had never had. "Open the basement door." Sophia grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Still, no signal. She was completely cut off. She heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. Then the voice changed. Now it was Uncle Richard's voice, gruff and annoyed. "Sophia, open this door. I forgot my keys." But Uncle Richard was in Louisville. She'd watched him drive away. "Sophia, I said open this door." The voice was getting angry now. "Don't make me ask again." She heard the doorknob rattle. Someone was trying to get into her bedroom. Sophia backed up against her headboard, the bat clutched in her hands. She wanted to scream, but her throat was closed up with fear. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then she heard it. Glass breaking downstairs. The sound of the living room window shattering. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps now. Heavy boots on the floor below. Voices, plural, speaking in a language she didn't understand. Harsh consonants. Rapid-fire exchanges. They were arguing about something. Sophia knew she had to move. She couldn't stay in her room. They'd get in eventually. She had to get out of the house. She crept to her bedroom window as quietly as possible. Her room was on the 2nd floor, but there was a porch roof directly below her window. If she could get out there, she could drop down into Aunt Linda's flower bed, and from there, she could run. She unlocked her window and pushed it open as slowly as possible, trying not to make noise. The October air hit her face, cold and fresh. She heard footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. Sophia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the sill and pulled herself out onto the porch roof. The shingles were cold through her thin pajama pants. She crawled to the edge, hung her legs over, and dropped. She hit the flower bed hard, felt the impact jar through her ankles, but she'd landed on her feet. She ran. The forest was dark and full of branches that grabbed at her, but she didn't care. She knew this property. She'd walked it dozens of times during the day. The Hendersons' house was 2 miles northeast. If she could get there, she'd be safe. She heard shouting behind her, men's voices, yelling at each other. They'd discovered she was gone. Sophia ran harder, her breath coming in gasps. The cold air burned her lungs. Branches scratched her face and arms. She was running in pajamas and bare feet, having left her shoes behind, but fear kept her moving. After what felt like forever, she saw lights through the trees. The Hendersons' house. Sophia burst from the forest into their backyard and pounded on their back door, screaming. The lights came on. Mr. Henderson opened the door, a man in his 70s in a bathrobe, eyes wide with alarm. "Sophia, what? Call the police," Sophia gasped. "There are men in our house. They broke in. They were trying to. Please call the police." Mrs. Henderson was already on the phone with 911. The police arrived within 40 minutes, impressively fast for rural Kentucky. By that time, Sophia was wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot tea that she couldn't taste, and trying to stop shaking. When the police entered the Martinez house, they found exactly what Sophia had described. The basement door had been torn off its hinges entirely. The bookshelf that Sophia had pushed against it was splintered, like someone had put their shoulder into it multiple times until the wood gave way. The living room window was shattered, glass everywhere. The house had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, electronics scattered across the floor. They found muddy boot prints throughout the house, multiple sets, at least 2 different sizes. The forensics team would later determine there had been a minimum of 3 intruders, possibly 4. But no fingerprints. The men had worn gloves. The Henderson's security camera, which pointed toward the road, had captured something useful. 2 men in dark clothing, hoods up, walking quickly away from the direction of the Martinez property around 1:47 a.m. One was carrying what looked like a crowbar. The police detective assigned to the case told Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard that Sophia was incredibly lucky. They clearly thought the house was empty, the detective said. When they realized someone was there, they tried to lure her out. The voice recordings, they probably had audio files on a phone, played through a speaker. It's a tactic we've seen before. Once they realized she wasn't falling for it and wasn't going to open doors, they forced entry. "But why?" Aunt Linda asked, her face pale. "We don't have anything valuable. We're not wealthy." The detective shrugged. Rural houses are targets, isolated, response times are slow. They're looking for electronics, jewelry, anything they can sell quickly. Usually these guys hit empty houses. Yours was supposed to be empty that weekend. "How did they know we'd be gone?" Uncle Richard asked, his voice dangerous. "Might have been watching the house. Might have gotten lucky. Hard to say. They never caught the men. The case remained open, but without fingerprints or clear faces on the camera, there were no leads." The next week, Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard installed a full security system with cameras, motion sensors, and a panic button in every room. The basement door was replaced with a reinforced steel door with 3 separate locks. But Sophia couldn't stay there. Every time she walked past that basement door, she heard her mother's voice calling to her. Every time she was in her room at night, she remembered the footsteps in the hallway. She transferred to a school in Lexington and moved in with her grandmother, Aunt Linda's mother, who lived in the city. She visited the farmhouse occasionally, but she never stayed overnight. Even now, at 19, Sophia can't stand certain sounds. Heating vents make her anxious. Unknown voices calling names make her freeze. And she never, ever stays anywhere alone at night. The therapist she sees now says it's PTSD, that the intruders didn't just violate her physical space, they violated her grief, weaponized her trauma in the cruelest way possible. Sophia thinks about that sometimes, about how someone had access to her mother's voice. They must have recorded it from somewhere, maybe social media videos, maybe old voicemails Sophia's family had shared online in the days after the accident. Those public memorials that seemed like a good idea at the time. Someone had taken that grief and turned it into a tool, a way to manipulate a 16-year-old girl into opening a door. She wonders what would have happened if she had. If she'd been desperate enough, grief-stricken enough to believe, even for a second, that her mother was really down there, cold, asking to come inside. She doesn't like to think about it, but sometimes, late at night, she can't help it. The worst part isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. And the voices, even the fake ones, never really leave. Daniel Cooper had been a veterinarian for 42 years before he retired. He'd spent his career with his hands inside animals, carving heifers at 3 a.m, setting broken bones on dogs hit by cars, euthanizing beloved pets while their owners wept. He'd learned early that suffering was part of life, that sometimes all you could do was minimize it, and that mercy was often the hardest choice to make. He'd also served in Vietnam as an army medic, back when he was young and believed he was invincible. That experience had taught him different lessons about what humans were capable of doing to each other, about trauma that couldn't be fixed with stitches and antibiotics, about the screams you never stop hearing even 50 years later. Now, at 67, Daniel was a widower. His wife Margaret had passed 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Too fast, too brutal, too unfair. His daughters lived in different states, with families of their own. They called every week, visited on holidays, but their lives had moved on. Daniel's life had contracted to a smaller circle. His house in Charlottesville, his garden, his books, and the cabin. The cabin had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built it in the 1940s, deep in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, 18 miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a rutted 4-wheel drive track that most modern vehicles couldn't handle. No electricity, no running water, just a wood stove, a hand pump for well water, and kerosene lamps for light. Daniel's grandfather had been a logger. He'd wanted a place to escape to, away from civilization. His father had maintained it, used it as a hunting cabin. Daniel had inherited it when his father died, and unlike his siblings who'd wanted to sell it, Daniel had kept it. Every summer, he spent 2 weeks there, just him and the forest. It was June 2016 when Daniel made his annual trip. He packed his old Jeep Cherokee with supplies, canned goods, rice, coffee, propane for the camp stove, his first aid kit. He was retired, but old habits died hard. Fishing gear, books, and his Winchester rifle. The rifle was mostly for bears, not to kill them, but to scare them off. In 40 years of visiting that cabin, he'd only fired it twice, both times warning shots. The drive took 6 hours from Charlottesville. The last 4 miles were the worst, switchbacks and washouts in places where the road was more suggestion than reality. But the Cherokee handled it, and by late afternoon, Daniel was pulling up to the cabin. It looked exactly as he'd left it last summer. Weathered wood, green metal roof, a small porch with 2 rocking chairs. The forest pressed in close on all sides. Massive oaks and maples, thick underbrush of mountain laurel and rhododendron. Daniel unloaded his gear, swept out the cabin. Mice always got in during the winter, and got the wood stove going. Even in June, the nights got cold at this elevation. He spent the first evening on the porch with a book and a glass of bourbon, watching the sun set through the trees and listening to the forest sounds. A barred owl called from somewhere nearby. Frogs sang down by the creek. It was perfect. The first week passed in peaceful routine. Daniel woke with the sun, made coffee on the camp stove, spent mornings fishing in the creek, or hiking the unmarked trails he'd learned over decades. Afternoons were for reading or chopping firewood. Evenings were for cooking simple meals and sitting on the porch until darkness made the words in his book impossible to read. He saw wildlife constantly. Deer were common, practically tame. He spotted a black bear one morning, a good-sized one, but it ambled off when it caught his scent. Turkey vultures circled overhead. He found bobcat tracks in the mud near the creek. It wasn't until the 10th night that anything unusual happened. Daniel woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. He checked his watch, an old habit from his medical days. Something had pulled him from sleep, some sound that didn't belong. He lay in the darkness, listening. The cabin only had one room, so his bed was just feet from the door and windows. He could hear the normal sounds, wind in the trees, the creek in the distance, insects. Then he heard it again. What had woken him? A child screaming, high-pitched, terrified, full of pain and fear. It came from somewhere in the forest, distant but clear. Then it cut off abruptly, like someone had covered the child's mouth. Daniel was out of bed immediately. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his rifle and flashlight, and was out the door within 60 seconds. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline response of someone trained to respond to emergencies. He stood on the porch, scanning the forest with his flashlight. "Hello? Is someone out there? Do you need help?" Silence, just the wind and the insects. Daniel moved into the forest, calling out every few yards. He searched for 2 hours, covering maybe a mile radius from the cabin. He found nothing, no signs of people, no more sounds. As the sky started to lighten with pre-dawn gray, Daniel made his way back to the cabin. He was exhausted, confused, and worried. He knew he'd heard a child scream. It had been real, not a dream. But where had it come from? He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been an animal, a fox or a rabbit being killed by a predator. Sometimes dying animals sounded disturbingly human. Maybe it had been a bobcat. They could make sounds like screaming women. But Daniel had been around animals his entire life. He knew what they sounded like, and that had been a human child. He made coffee and sat on the porch as the sun came up, trying to decide what to do. There was no cell service out here. That was part of the appeal. His nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, a seasonal hunting camp that was probably empty this time of year. The ranger station was 18 miles back, the way he'd come. He decided he'd spend the day searching the area more thoroughly. If he didn't find anything, he'd hike out tomorrow and report it to the rangers. By mid-morning, Daniel was following the creek downstream. That's when he found the first piece of evidence that he hadn't imagined things. A sneaker print in the mud, small, like a child's, and next to it, a barefoot print. The same foot, he realized. The kid had lost one shoe. The prints were fresh, made within the last 12 hours. Daniel's stomach tightened. A child was out here, alone, possibly injured. He followed the tracks carefully. They led away from the creek, deeper into the forest. After maybe a quarter mile, he found the shirt. It was torn, a boy's t-shirt with a superhero logo, and there was blood on it. Not a lot, but enough. The blood was still damp. "Hey!" Daniel called out. "If you can hear me, I'm here to help. I'm a doctor." It was a lie. Veterinarians weren't doctors for humans, but close enough. "You're not in trouble. I just want to help." No response. Daniel kept following the tracks. They were erratic, sometimes doubling back, like the child was lost or being chased. That's when he heard the men. Voices, low and male, coming from somewhere ahead. Daniel ducked behind a large oak and listened. 2 men by the sound of it. They were talking in normal tones, not trying to be quiet. Daniel couldn't make out words, but the cadence suggested a conversation, not an argument. He moved closer, using the trees for cover. His years hunting had taught him how to move quietly through the forest. Through the undergrowth he saw them. 2 men in camouflage, carrying hunting rifles. They were standing about 40 yards away, examining the ground, looking at tracks. Ci sul... Went this way, one of them said, loud enough for Daniel to hear. The other man nodded. Can't have gotten far. Kid's only been running for 3 days. 3 days. The child had been out here for 3 days. What do we do when we find him? The first man asked. The second man's answer made Daniel's blood run cold. Same thing we were going to do before he ran. Boss is pissed, though. Said we should have been more careful. They were hunting the child. Actually, hunting him. Daniel stayed hidden as the men moved off in the direction the tracks had been leading. Once they were far enough away, Daniel circled wide, moving parallel to their path but staying out of sight. He needed to find the child before they did. He followed his instincts, thinking about where a scared kid would hide, somewhere defensible, somewhere they couldn't be easily found. His eyes scanned the forest for good hiding spots. That's when he saw movement. Low to the ground, near a fallen log. Daniel approached slowly, hands visible, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Those men are looking for you, but I'm not with them. I'm here to help." A face appeared from inside a hollow log. A boy, maybe 11 years old. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, covered in scratches. He was filthy, wearing only underwear and socks. His eyes were huge and terrified. "It's okay," Daniel said, kneeling down slowly. "My name is Daniel. I heard you last night. You were screaming. I've been looking for you." The boy's lips trembled. He looked like he was trying to decide whether to run or trust. Daniel pulled his water bottle from his pack and held it out. "You must be thirsty. Here, it's just water." The boy's hand shot out and grabbed the bottle. He drank desperately, water spilling down his chin. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently. Michael," the boy whispered. "Okay, Michael. Can you tell me what happened? How did you get out here?" Michael's whole body was shaking. They took me from the park. There were other kids in a cabin. They kept us locked up." Daniel felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp, but he kept his voice calm. "Where is this cabin?" Michael pointed vaguely northeast. "I ran. 3 days ago. I ran when they weren't looking. They've been chasing me." "How many men?" "2, sometimes 3, and a lady." Daniel pulled off his flannel shirt and helped Michael put it on. The boy was shivering, probably hypothermic. "Okay, Michael, I'm going to get you somewhere safe. But we need to be quiet, and we need to move fast. Can you walk?" Michael nodded. His feet were torn up, bloody. Daniel had brought a first aid kit, but they didn't have time for treatment. Not yet. "Put your arms around my neck," Daniel said, turning around. "I'm going to carry you." Michael climbed onto Daniel's back. He weighed almost nothing. Daniel started moving, heading back toward his cabin. It was the only shelter he knew of, and from there he could plan their next move. But he'd only gone maybe 50 yards when he heard the sound that made his stomach drop. A TV engines. Getting closer. They weren't just hunting on foot anymore. They'd brought vehicles. Daniel changed direction, moving perpendicular to the sound of the engines. He couldn't outrun ATVs, but he could go places they couldn't. He headed into thicker forest, where the undergrowth would slow the vehicles down. Michael clung to his back, silent. Daniel could feel the boy trembling. They moved for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. The ATV sounds faded, but Daniel didn't trust it. He kept moving, using a creek to mask their tracks, staying under heavy tree cover. By the time they reached the cabin, it was early evening. Daniel's legs were shaking from exertion. 67 wasn't as young as it used to be. He set Michael down on the porch and scanned the surrounding forest. No sounds of pursuit. Inside, Daniel got water boiling on the camp stove. He had packets of instant soup, not much, but warm and full of salt, which Michael needed. While the water heated, he examined Michael's feet. The boy had been running barefoot through the forest for 3 days. His feet were a mess of cuts and blisters, several showing signs of infection. "This is going to hurt," Daniel warned, pulling out antiseptic from his first aid kit. "But I need to clean these wounds." Michael bit down on a rolled-up towel and didn't make a sound while Daniel worked. The boy had learned not to scream, Daniel realized. Had learned that screaming brought the wrong kind of attention. As Michael ate the soup, Daniel tried to get more information. "This cabin where they kept you, do you remember anything about how to get there? Any landmarks?" Michael thought hard. There was a big rock, shaped like a face, and a metal gate. Daniel knew the area. He thought he knew which property Michael was describing, an old hunting cabin that had changed hands several times over the years. He'd always assumed it was abandoned. "How many other kids are there?" Daniel asked gently. "4. When I left, but..." Michael's voice broke. "But I think some of them are dead. I heard them talking about how they'd gotten rid of some." Daniel felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This was worse than he'd thought, much worse. "Okay, Michael, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stay here tonight. We'll take shifts sleeping. I'll stay awake first. At dawn, we're going to sneak out of here and hike to my car. It's about 4 miles. Can you make it?" Michael nodded. "I ran for 3 days. I can make it." "Good. But Michael, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens tonight, no matter what sounds you hear, you stay quiet. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." Daniel loaded his rifle. He had maybe 20 rounds total. He hoped he wouldn't need any of them. The night was the longest of Daniel's life. He sat in the darkness, no lanterns, nothing that would give away their position, with his rifle across his lap and Michael sleeping fitfully on the bed behind him. Around 8 p.m., Daniel heard them, the ATVs again, but closer, and then voices calling out, "We know you're out here. Just give us the boy and we'll let you go." Daniel didn't respond. Michael stirred but didn't make a sound. The voices moved around the perimeter of the cabin. 2 men, Daniel thought. Maybe 3. "You don't know what you're getting into, old man. This isn't your business." Still Daniel said nothing. At some point around 10 p.m., one of them tried the door. Daniel had barricaded it with everything he could move. The door rattled but held. "Fine," a voice said. "We can wait. You gotta come out eventually." But around 2 a.m., the sound stopped. The men left. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe they were regrouping. Either way, Daniel used the opportunity. "Michael, wake up. We're leaving now." They slipped out the back window. Daniel had removed the screen earlier in preparation. They moved through the forest using the darkness for cover, no flashlights, Daniel navigating by memory and the faint starlight filtering through the trees. Michael kept up without complaint, though Daniel could hear his breathing labored and pained. 4 miles through mountain forest at night. It should have been impossible for an 11-year-old who'd been starved and traumatized. But Michael made it. They reached Daniel's jeep just as the sky was starting to lighten. Daniel had never been so grateful to see that beat-up Cherokee. They drove for 3 hours before Daniel felt safe enough to stop. He pulled into a gas station in a small town and used the payphone to call 911. The response was massive. Local police, state police, FBI. Michael was taken to a hospital, where he was reunited with his family. He'd been missing for 6 days total, taken from a park in Roanoke, while his mother was talking to another parent. The investigation that followed was extensive. Using Michael's description and Daniel's knowledge of the area, authorities located the cabin. They found evidence of 4 other children having been there, though the children themselves were gone. 2 men were arrested at a checkpoint on a county road trying to leave the area. Dale Hopkins and his nephew, Marcus Hopkins. A third person, a woman named Sarah Jennings, was caught 3 days later trying to board a bus in Tennessee. The investigation revealed a child trafficking ring that had been operating for at least 3 years, using remote cabins in national forests across Virginia and West Virginia to hide victims before moving them elsewhere. 4 other children were eventually recovered from various locations. 2 had been sold to adoptive families through fraudulent agencies. 2 were found in a house in Pennsylvania. 3 children were never found. The traffickers never revealed what had happened to them. Dale Hopkins, Marcus Hopkins, and Sarah Jennings were all convicted. Dale and Marcus got life sentences. Sarah got 40 years. Michael testified at the trial. Daniel attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When Michael saw him, the boy broke from his mother's arms and ran to hug him. "You saved my life," Michael said. Daniel hugged him back. This broken child who'd been strong enough to run for 3 days through the wilderness, strong enough to survive. That was 8 years ago. Michael is 19 now. He's in college, studying criminal justice. He wants to be a prosecutor. He and Daniel still stay in touch, emails mostly, sometimes phone calls. Michael's family invites Daniel to holidays, though Daniel usually declines. He's not good with crowds anymore. Daniel still goes to the cabin every summer. He's 72 now, and the hike is getting harder. But he goes because it's where he found purpose again, where he remembered that sometimes you can make a difference. The forest is just a forest. It's people who make it dangerous, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's people who make it safe again. Pause. Last summer, Daniel was sitting on his porch at the cabin when he heard a vehicle approaching. He tensed. Even now, 8 years later, the sound of engines makes him nervous. But it was Michael. Now a tall young man, barely recognizable as the terrified child Daniel had carried through the forest. "Thought I'd come see the place," Michael said, "if that's okay." Daniel made coffee and they sat on the porch, talking. About college, about Michael's goals, about the other survivors, and how they were doing. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't heard me that night?" Michael asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I think about it a lot." "Me too," Michael said, "and I'm grateful, every single day." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the forest. The same forest where Michael had run for his life, where Daniel had made the choice to help, rather than to pretend he'd heard nothing. "I learned something from all this," Michael said eventually, "about evil. It's not some abstract thing. It's just people making choices, bad choices. And the only thing that stops it is other people making better choices." Daniel nodded. In his years as a medic, as a veterinarian, as a widower alone in the woods, he'd learned the same thing. The world is full of suffering, some of it random, some of it deliberate. But mercy is a choice too, and sometimes if you're paying attention, you get the chance to choose it. Jason Rivera had always believed that the wilderness was neutral, not good, not evil, just indifferent, a place where nature operated according to its own logic, where humans were guests at best, and where survival depended on preparation and respect. That belief died in August 2022 in a part of Cherokee National Forest that straddled the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Died along with his sense that the world operated according to rules he understood. Jason was 28, a software engineer from Nashville who spent his weekdays staring at screens and his weekends trying to remember what reality felt like without pixels. Hiking had become his religion, his therapy, his way of staying sane in a world that felt increasingly digital and disconnected. His girlfriend, Maya, was 27, a photographer whose Instagram was full of stunning landscape shots. Golden hour, over ridge lines, misty valleys, wildflowers in impossible colors. They'd been together for 2 years, and Jason had bought the ring 3 months ago. He was planning to propose on this trip, at a scenic overlook he'd scouted online. They'd invited Jason's childhood friend, Connor Blake, and Connor's sister, Rachel. Connor was a paramedic, 29, the kind of person you wanted around in an emergency. Rachel was 26, working on her PhD in biology, specifically studying plant adaptation in Appalachian ecosystems. She'd jumped at the chance to explore Cherokee National Forest. It was part of her research area. The 4 of them had backpacking experience. They'd done sections of the Appalachian Trail together, had camped in the Smokies and the Blue Ridge. This trip was meant to be their most ambitious. A 6-day loop trail through backcountry that most people avoided because it was long, hard, and remote. They started on a Wednesday in early August. The weather forecast was perfect. Clear skies, warm days, cool nights. They parked Jason's truck at the trailhead, signed the register. Only 3 other groups had signed in during the past month, and set off with high spirits and heavy packs. The first day was everything they'd hoped for. The trail wound through old-growth forest, past waterfalls that crashed into pools deep enough to swim in. Rachel kept stopping to photograph and catalog plant species. Maya took what felt like 1,000 photos. Connor and Jason fell into the easy rhythm of hiking together, barely needing words. They made camp that first night near a stream, cooked an elaborate freeze-dried meal that Connor had insisted on bringing, and sat around the fire talking about everything and nothing. Jason kept touching the ring box in his pocket, wondering when the right moment would be. The second day brought them higher into the mountains. The trees changed from oak and maple to pine and spruce. The air got thinner, cooler. They were covering good distance, making better time than they'd planned. That afternoon, they encountered another hiker. The man appeared suddenly on the trail ahead, like he'd materialized from the trees. He was in his early 50s, disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been out for a while. His clothes were dirty but not torn. His face was unshaven but not fully bearded. His pack looked modern and well-maintained. "Hey!" Jason called out in greeting. The man stopped and stared at them. His eyes were intense, almost feverish. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Maya laughed nervously. "We have a permit. We're allowed on this trail." "No, I mean..." The man stepped closer, and they could see he was agitated. "How long have you been out here?" 2 days, Connor said. "We're doing the loop, 6 days total." 6 days, the man repeated. His voice was strange, flat. "I've been out here for, I don't know, days, maybe weeks. I can't find my way back." Rachel frowned. "Where did you start?" "The western trailhead, same as you probably. But I got turned around. The trail markers are wrong. They lead you in circles." Jason pulled out his GPS unit. "We've got navigation. We're on track." The man laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Sure, that's what I thought too. But you'll see. Once they start, you can't get out." "Once what starts?" Maya asked. The man looked at her, and Jason saw something in his eyes that looked like pity, or fear, or both. "The voices, they'll call your name. They'll sound like people you love. And you can't not listen. They get inside your head." Connor, with his EMT training, stepped forward. "Hey buddy, you okay? You might be dehydrated. Let me give you some electrolytes." The man backed away. "Don't listen to them. No matter how real they sound. Don't respond. Don't go toward them. And whatever you do, stay together." Then he pushed past them and continued down the trail. moving quickly despite his obvious exhaustion. The four friends stood in silence for a moment. "That was weird," Maya said finally. "Dehydration can cause confusion," Connor offered. "Or maybe he ate something. There are poisonous plants out here." Rachel nodded slowly, but she looked troubled. "My advisor told me stories about this area. Folklore stuff, about voices in the forest. I thought it was just local superstition." Jason felt uneasy, but he pushed it down. "Come on, we've got 3 more hours of daylight. Let's make some miles." They hiked until dusk, then found a good spot to camp, a relatively open area with decent sightlines. They set up the tents, Jason and Maya in one, Connor and Rachel in the other. Dinner was quieter than the night before. The encounter with the strange hiker had affected all of them, though no one wanted to admit it. "I'm sure he's fine," Maya said as they cleaned up. "Probably just been out too long. Got cabin fever or whatever the wilderness version of that is." "Trail fever?" Connor suggested with a weak smile. They turned in early. Jason lay in his sleeping bag next to Maya, listening to the forest sounds. Crickets, wind in the pines, the occasional call of a night bird. Normal sounds. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A soft whistling. Musical. Almost melodic. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing through the trees. Jason sat up. "You hear that?" Maya stirred. "Hear what?" "That whistling sound." They listened together. The sound faded, then stopped. "Probably just wind through the rocks," Maya murmured, already drifting back to sleep. But Jason lay awake for a long time, listening. The next morning, Maya shook him awake. "Jason, come look at this." He crawled out of the tent to find Connor and Rachel already up, standing at the edge of their campsite, staring at the ground. Footprints, dozens of them, barefoot, forming a circle around where they'd slept. The prints were similar to what Tyler's group had seen in the Blue Ridge, human-shaped but wrong, the toes too long, the stride pattern unusual. "What the hell?" Jason breathed. Connor was already kneeling, examining them. Multiple individuals, at least 5, maybe 6. They circled us several times during the night. "And none of us heard anything?" Rachel's voice was tight. That was the disturbing part. The ground was covered in dry pine needles. It should have been impossible to walk on without making noise, but none of them had heard a thing. "Could it be a prank?" Maya suggested. "Other hikers messing with us?" "Out here?" Rachel gestured at the empty forest around them. "We haven't seen anyone except that one guy yesterday." Jason felt the unease from last night returning, stronger now. "Maybe we should cut the trip short, head back," but Rachel shook her head. "We're 2 days in. We'd have to backtrack. It's actually shorter to continue the loop at this point." They debated for an hour, but ultimately decided to press on. They'd stay more alert, would set up watch rotations at night, but they'd complete the loop as planned. That was their first mistake. The day passed without incident, but the atmosphere had changed. They hiked in relative silence, constantly looking over their shoulders. Rachel kept stopping to examine the forest around them, like she was trying to spot whoever, or whatever, had circled their camp. Around mid-afternoon, Jason fell behind the group to adjust his pack straps. When he looked up, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing between 2 trees about 50 yards upslope. Tall and thin, perfectly still, watching. He blinked, and it was gone. "You okay?" Connor called back. "Yeah. Thought I saw. Never mind." That night, they made camp in a more defensible position, backs against a rock outcropping, tents close together. They built the fire larger than necessary, and agreed on watch rotations. Jason took first watch, 10 p.m. to midnight. He sat by the fire with Connor's knife on his belt and Maya's bear spray in his hand, feeding sticks into the flames and trying not to think about the circle of footprints. At 11:30, he heard it again, the whistling. But this time, it wasn't just whistling. Voices, faint but clear, coming from the darkness beyond the firelight. Jason. His name. Someone was calling his name. Jason, come here. It sounded like his brother. His brother who died in a motorcycle accident 3 years ago. The same voice, the same inflection, the same way he'd always called Jason's name when they were kids. Jason stood up, flashlight in hand. Who's there? The voice didn't answer directly, just kept calling. Jason, this way. I need to show you something. Every rational part of Jason's brain screamed that this wasn't real. His brother was dead, but it sounded so exactly like him that Jason found himself taking a step toward the darkness. Then he remembered what the hiker had said. They'll sound like people you love. Jason stepped back and woke Connor for his shift. He didn't mention the voices. He just crawled into his tent and lay there, shaking, while Maya slept peacefully beside him. Connor woke him at 2 a.m., face pale in the flashlight beam. Rachel's gone. Jason was out of the tent in seconds. Rachel's sleeping bag was cold, empty. Her boots were still in her tent, but she was gone. The three of them searched the immediate area, calling her name. Nothing. Then Jason found the tracks, barefoot prints leading away from camp, but mixed with them were boot prints, Rachel's boots, the distinctive tread pattern. She walked out there, Maya said, horrified. In her sleep or following something, Connor finished. His voice was rough with fear. We have to find her. They followed the tracks, 3 flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The prints wound through the forest in patterns that made no sense. Circles, spirals, backtracking. This is impossible, Jason said. She couldn't have walked this far. We've been going for 30 minutes. But the tracks kept leading them on. And then, suddenly, they found her. Rachel was standing in a clearing, facing away from them. She was perfectly still, arms at her sides, just staring at a large pine tree. Rachel! Connor rushed forward, but Jason grabbed his arm. Wait, something's wrong. They approached slowly. When they got close enough, they could see Rachel's eyes were open, but she wasn't blinking, wasn't responding. Connor touched her shoulder and she collapsed into his arms. Rachel, can you hear me? Her eyes focused slowly. Connor, what? Where am I? You left camp. You were out here. Do you remember? Rachel's face crumpled in confusion. I heard voices calling me. It sounded like Mom. She was asking me to help her. I followed. I don't remember anything after that. They got Rachel back to camp, but none of them could sleep. As the sun rose, they made a decision. They were leaving. Immediately. Forget the loop. They'd hike straight out, whatever direction got them to civilization fastest. They packed up quickly and started hiking. According to the GPS, if they headed due north, they'd hit a Forest Service road in about 8 hours. But the forest had other plans. They hiked for 2 hours by Jason's watch, following the compass bearing exactly. Then Connor stopped. We're back at our campsite. He was right. The same rock outcropping, the same fire ring, still warm from their morning fire. That's impossible, Maya said. We walked in a straight line. I watched the compass the entire time. They tried again. Different direction this time. Jason in the lead with the GPS. Connor behind him with a backup compass. 2 more hours of hiking. Same campsite. On the third attempt, Rachel started crying. "It's not letting us leave. Whatever this is, it doesn't want us to go." The day wore on. They tried different strategies, following the sun, marking trees as they passed them, even splitting up briefly before fear drove them back together. Every time, they ended up back at the same campsite. As afternoon faded toward evening, they were exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. The forest around them was utterly silent. No birds, no insects, nothing but the whisper of wind through the pines. "We're going to die out here," Maya said flatly. She wasn't crying, wasn't panicking. She'd moved past that into a kind of hollow acceptance. Jason pulled her close. "No, we're not. We're going to survive this." But he didn't know if he believed it. That night, their fourth night, the whispers started earlier, while it was still light out, around 7 p.m. Multiple voices calling all their names. Jason, Maya, Connor, Rachel. Soft, pleading, familiar. For Jason, his brother's voice. For Maya, her mother. For Connor, his father. For Rachel, her mother. "Please, come find us. We're waiting." And between the voices, they could see movement in the trees. Figures, human-shaped but wrong. They moved too smoothly, too quietly. They never came close enough to see clearly, but they were there, circling, always circling. The four friends huddled together by the fire, weapons drawn, knives, bear spray, hiking poles, facing outward like pioneers circling wagons. "Don't listen," Connor said. "Don't respond. Just ignore them." But how do you ignore your dead brother calling your name? How do you ignore your mother begging you to come home? The night stretched on forever. None of them could sleep. Not really. Every time someone's eyes started to close, the voices would spike, would become more insistent, and fear would snap them awake. By dawn, they were hallucinating from exhaustion. Jason kept seeing his brother standing just at the edge of the clearing. Maya was talking to people who weren't there. "We have to sleep," Rachel said. Her voice was slurred, her eyes bloodshot. "We can't function like this." "If we sleep, we might not wake up," Connor replied. "Or we might wake up miles away with no memory." "I don't care," Rachel said. I can't do this anymore." Jason looked at his GPS again. It showed them going in circles, even though they'd stayed in the same spot. The elevation reading kept changing, latitude and longitude numbers that made no sense. He checked his phone. No signal, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the date. His phone insisted it had been 12 days since they'd left the trailhead, but it had only been 4 days. Jason was certain. "Something's wrong with time here," he said quietly. "Our devices can't track it properly." Maya laughed, high and thin. "Great, so we're trapped in a time loop in a haunted forest. That's just perfect." It was Connor who suggested they just pick a direction and walk. Forget the GPS, forget the compass, just walk and keep walking no matter what. "We know these mountains run generally east-west. If we head north, we'll eventually hit something, a road, a town, a ranger station. We just have to keep going." It was desperate logic, but none of them had anything better. They started walking at full daylight, due north by the sun. They agreed they wouldn't stop, wouldn't rest, would just keep pushing until they found civilization or collapsed trying. The forest fought them. Thick undergrowth appeared where it shouldn't be. The terrain became impossibly steep. They fell, scraped themselves bloody on rocks, kept going, and all the while, the voices followed. The figures paced them through the trees. "Almost there," the voices promised. "Just a little further." Jason didn't know how long they walked. His watch had stopped. His phone was dead. Time had become meaningless. There was only the act of moving forward, of putting one foot in front of the other. It was Maya who heard it first. "Wait, do you hear that?" They stopped, listening. Traffic. The distant sound of cars on asphalt. They ran, stumbled, fell, got up, ran again. Through the trees, down a slope, across a stream. And then they were on pavement. A real highway, with painted lines and a speed limit sign. A car drove past, then another. Normal people, going normal places, completely unaware of the 4 filthy, bleeding hikers who'd just emerged from the forest. They stood on the shoulder of the road, and Jason started laughing. Or crying, maybe both. They'd made it out. A truck stopped, a farmer heading into town. He took one look at them, and didn't ask questions, just told them to get in. He drove them to the nearest town, a place called Elk Creek, where they called the ranger station. The rangers came quickly, efficient, professional, took their statements, asked them to point on a map where they'd been. Jason pointed. The ranger's face went carefully neutral. "You're sure about this location?" "Yes, why?" "Because you started here." The ranger indicated the western trailhead. 4 days ago. "And this location where you claim you camped," he pointed to Jason's mark, "is about 200 miles from there." "That's impossible," Connor said. The ranger just looked at them. "I'm telling you what the map says." They checked into a motel in Elk Creek. They showered, ate real food, slept in real beds. But the sleep didn't help. Jason woke up every few hours, convinced he heard the voices. The next day, they drove back to the trailhead where Jason's truck was parked. It was still there, untouched. According to the parking permit, it had been there for 4 days. But Jason's truck's odometer showed they were in a completely different location than they should be. 200 miles off, just like the ranger said. None of it made sense. Over the following weeks, they all deteriorated. Maya broke off the engagement. She couldn't handle being around anyone from the trip. Every time she saw Jason, she heard the voices again. Rachel dropped out of her PhD program and moved back home with her parents. She couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time without nightmares. Connor required medical intervention, sleep medication, anti-anxiety meds, therapy twice a week. Jason became obsessed. He started researching, joining forums, collecting similar reports. He found dozens of them. Same area, same pattern. Whispers, circling figures, time distortion. Impossible distances traveled with no memory of how. One report was from a man named Robert Chen, posted 6 months after Jason's experience. Robert described the exact same phenomenon. Voices, figures, spatial confusion. But what chilled Jason was Robert's conclusion. "I'm going back. I need to understand what they are. I think they're trying to communicate." Jason tried to reach out through the forum. Robert responded once. "They're not dangerous. They're curious. I think we've been interpreting this wrong. I'm going back in next week to try to make contact." That was 3 weeks ago. Robert hasn't posted since. Jason called the ranger station, asked if anyone named Robert Chen had checked in on the trails. "No one by that name has a permit in our system," the ranger told him. But Jason knows Robert went back. He knows because he's found other posts, cryptic ones, from people who claim to have understood what the whispers mean. They all have one thing in common. They're planning return trips, and none of them come back to the forums afterward. Last month, Jason drove back to Elk Creek. Not to hike. He can't bring himself to enter those woods again, but to ask questions. An old man at the general store told him something that made Jason's blood run cold. "You're asking about the voices? My grandfather used to work for the Forest Service back in the 50s. He said they knew about it even then, called it Zone 7 in their internal reports. said people would go in and come out days later miles from where they should be, with no memory of the time in between. But the service decided not to publicize it, figured it would cause panic, or worse, attract the wrong kind of attention. What kind of attention? Jason asked. The old man shrugged. The kind that thinks they can communicate with it. They always go back in, and they never come back out. Jason thinks about Robert Chen a lot, about the strange hiker they met on day 2, about the look in his eyes when he said he'd been lost for weeks. He thinks about the voices, so perfectly mimicking people they loved, about the figures that moved too smoothly through the trees. Most of all, he thinks about time, about how his phone insisted 12 days had passed when he knew it was only 4, about how they traveled 200 miles, but didn't remember it. Where did those 8 days go? What happened during the time they can't remember? The worst part is the dreams. Jason has the same one every night now. He's back in the clearing, and Rachel is standing there, facing the tree. But when he approaches, she turns around, and her eyes are completely black, and when she speaks, it's not her voice. It's all the voices at once, layered and harmonized and wrong. And she says, "We tried to show you. You weren't ready, but you'll come back. They always come back." Jason wakes up in a cold sweat, and for a moment, he doesn't know where he is, doesn't know when he is. He checks his phone obsessively, checks the date, the time, makes sure it matches reality, because he's terrified that one morning he'll wake up and it won't, that he'll realize he never actually left the forest, that he's still there, circling in the darkness, listening to voices that know his name. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had spent her entire adult life studying the past. At 41, she'd published 3 books on American architectural history, lectured at universities across the country, and developed a reputation as one of the foremost experts on colonial and Victorian-era estates. She understood old houses. She knew how to read them, the stories hidden in their foundations, the secrets whispered by their walls, the family dramas encoded in their floor plans. A house, she'd written in her second book, was a 3-dimensional archive of human ambition, pride, fear, and loss. What she didn't understand, what her academic training had never prepared her for, was that sometimes a house doesn't just contain stories, sometimes it is the story, and sometimes it's still being written. The listing appeared on an obscure real estate website in November 2023. A 230-year-old mansion in the Appalachian Mountains, exact location withheld pending NDA, 15 rooms, 60 acres, surrounded by protected forest. Historical significance dating back to pre-revolutionary era. The price was absurdly low. For a property of that age and size, Elizabeth would have expected 7 figures. This was listed for $180,000. The real estate agent, a nervous woman named Patricia, explained over the phone. The estate comes with certain stipulations. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the exact location. The previous owners, there have been several, all chose to maintain privacy about the property. Why? Elizabeth asked. A long pause. The house has a troubled history. I'm required to disclose that to you. Hauntings? Elizabeth smiled. She'd heard this before. Every old house had ghost stories. I wouldn't call it that exactly. More like persistence. Persistence? The house persists, Dr. Hartwell. Families come and go, but the house remains, and certain patterns repeat. Elizabeth should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why a house with such troubled history was being sold so cheaply. Should have questioned why 6 families over 200 years had owned it, none staying longer than 3 years. But she was in love with the photos, the Gothic Revival architecture, the Widow's Walk, the marble fireplaces, the hand-carved banisters. This was her life's work made tangible, a living museum of American history. She bought it. The renovations took 6.5 years. Elizabeth hired contractors, but they kept quitting. The first crew made it 2 weeks before the foreman called and said his men wouldn't go back. "What happened?" Elizabeth asked. "Tools going missing, sounds in the walls. One of my guys swears something pushed him down the basement stairs. I can't keep a crew there, Dr. Hartwell. I'm sorry." The second crew lasted a month. The third, 3 weeks. Over 6 years, Elizabeth went through 11 different contractors. Each had the same complaints: oppressive atmosphere, mysterious sounds, objects moving, feelings of being watched. But eventually, the work was done. Modern electrical, new plumbing, structural reinforcements. The house was finally safe to live in. Elizabeth moved in 7 months ago, in March 2024. She was excited. This was her dream, living inside history, surrounded by the past she'd spent her life studying. The first few weeks were perfect. She set up her office in the library, surrounded by books and documents. She began cataloging the house's architectural features, researching its original owners. The Crowell family, who'd built the house in 1794, prominent landowners, involved in early American politics. They'd vanished overnight in 1802. An entire family, just gone. No bodies ever found. Elizabeth found that fascinating rather than disturbing. Historical mysteries were her specialty. The small things started in week 2. A kitchen knife went missing from the block. Elizabeth searched everywhere: drawers, cabinets, dishwasher. 3 days later, she found it on the mantel in the library, a room she rarely used, on the opposite end of the house. She convinced herself she'd carried it there while distracted, maybe used it to open a package. Week 4. Her reading glasses disappeared from her nightstand. She found them 5 days later in the attic, on the windowsill. She hadn't been in the attic in weeks. Week 6. Her favorite coffee mug vanished. It reappeared in the basement, inside the old coal chute. How had it gotten there? The chute was sealed, hadn't been opened in decades. Elizabeth started noticing a pattern. The objects always appeared in rooms she didn't use. It was like something was trying to draw her to certain parts of the house, or trying to learn which spaces she avoided. That thought made her uncomfortable. She pushed it away. Old houses had quirks. Maybe she was more absent-minded than she realized. Early onset Alzheimer's ran in her family. Maybe this was a sign. But in week 8, her car keys disappeared. She found them the next day in a third-floor bathroom she'd never even entered. The bathroom door had been closed when she checked it during her search. She'd had to unlock it to get inside. Someone, or something, had locked the keys inside a room she couldn't access. Elizabeth started documenting everything. Photographs of where objects appeared, dates and times. She was a historian. Data mattered. The data showed escalation. Objects were moving more frequently, and they were appearing in increasingly specific locations, always in the parts of the house Elizabeth actively avoided. The basement, which gave her an inexplicable sense of dread. The third-floor bedrooms, which felt cold even in summer. The library, which she'd set up as her office, but found herself leaving whenever possible. It was learning her patterns, studying her the way she was studying it. Sleep became difficult. Elizabeth would wake at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., convinced someone was in the house. She'd lie there, listening to the settling sounds of old wood, trying to convince herself it was normal. Then came week 12. Elizabeth was working late in her study, a smaller room off the main hallway that she'd claimed as her workspace. It was 11:30 p.m. She was deep in research about the Crowell family, reading a letter from 1801 that mentioned peculiar occurrences in the house. 3 loud knocks on the study door. Deliberate, evenly spaced. Someone knocking to be let in. Elizabeth froze. All the doors and windows were locked. She checked them obsessively now, multiple times per night. She was alone. She had to be alone. Hello? Her voice came out small and scared. Silence. Elizabeth stood slowly, grabbed the fireplace poker, and crept to the door. She put her ear against the wood. Nothing. No breathing. No footsteps. She yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. She searched the entire house, poker in hand, turning on every light. Checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. The next night, the knocking came again, this time on her bedroom door. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Waiting. Elizabeth called out. No response. She opened the door to an empty hallway. On the 3rd night, the knocking moved throughout the house. Different doors, different rhythms, sometimes fast and frantic, sometimes slow and patient, like something was testing different approaches. She called the police. They came, flashlights and professionalism, and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been inside. Ma'am, old houses make sounds, the officer told her kindly. Pipes, wood settling, animals in the walls. I know what settling sounds like, Elizabeth said tightly. This was knocking, intentional knocking. The officer's partner, an older woman, gave Elizabeth a look that might have been pity. You're in that house, aren't you? The Crowell estate. Elizabeth started. How did you... We can't tell you what to do, the woman said carefully, but you're not the first owner to call us, and probably won't be the last. After they left, Elizabeth went to town. She needed supplies, needed to be around people, needed to feel normal. At the general store, an old man named Mr. Patterson recognized her address when she used her credit card. His face went pale. You're living there, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why does everyone react like that? Patterson glanced around, then leaned closer. Because everyone who lives there either leaves or disappears. He told her the history, the real history, not the sanitized version in the property records. 1794. The Crowell family built the house. In 1802, all 7 family members vanished overnight. The breakfast table was set, food half eaten, but no one was ever found. 1823, a new family, the Merchants. The father went mad within 6 months, attacked his wife with a knife, claimed the house told him to. He was committed to an asylum, where he died 3 months later, still screaming about voices in the walls. 1891. A family of 4. They lasted 8 months. All 4 disappeared. The local sheriff's report noted that their belongings were still in the house, but the family was gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of where they'd gone. 1934. A single owner, a recluse named Thomas Whitmore. He was found wandering in the forest 3 years later, naked, with no memory of who he was or where he'd come from. He lived in a state institution until his death in 1958, never recovering his identity. 1972. A couple lasted 6 months. They fled in the middle of the night and refused to discuss what happened. The wife filed for divorce a month later, citing irreconcilable differences. The husband drank himself to death within 2 years. 2010, a family tried to renovate it as a bed and breakfast. They abandoned the project after 6 weeks. When asked why, the father would only say, "The house made it clear we weren't welcome." Patterson looked at Elizabeth with genuine concern. "I'm telling you this not to scare you, but so you understand. That house, there's something wrong with the land it's built on. The old Cherokee wouldn't go near that area. Said it was cursed ground, that something lived there that was older than memory." Elizabeth thanked him and drove back to the house. She should have been terrified, should have packed her bags and left, but she was a scientist, a historian. She didn't believe in curses or spirits or ancient forces. There had to be a rational explanation. That night, she set up cameras in the hallways, motion-activated, recording to a cloud server. If something was moving through her house, she'd have proof. The knocking started at 11 p.m., louder than before, aggressive. Her bedroom door rattled like someone was trying to break it down. Elizabeth huddled in her bed, watching the door shake in its frame. She'd pushed her dresser against it hours ago, but still it rattled. At midnight, the shaking stopped. Silence. Elizabeth waited, barely breathing. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway, clear, distinct, heavy boots on hardwood, walking slowly up and down the hall outside her room. She checked the cameras on her phone. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued. Elizabeth didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next. By the end of the week, she was hallucinating from exhaustion, seeing shadows move in her peripheral vision, hearing whispers in empty rooms. She tried to leave, loaded her car, determined to drive to a hotel, to get away for a few days and clear her head. But as she was carrying her suitcase down the stairs, something threw it back up. Not a person. There was no one there. The suitcase just flew from her hands and tumbled back up the stairs, landing at the top. Elizabeth stood frozen, staring at it. Then she heard a voice. Not loud, just a whisper, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Stay." That was last week. Since then, things have gotten worse. Objects don't just move anymore. They fly. Books thrown across rooms, dishes shattering. Last night, while Elizabeth was trying to cook dinner, every cabinet in the kitchen opened at once. The doors slammed shut, opened again, shut, over and over, like something was trying to communicate or trying to intimidate her into leaving. The cameras show nothing. Motion sensors trigger constantly, but the footage is always empty. Whatever's in this house doesn't show up on recordings. Elizabeth hasn't slept in 4 days. She's tried staying awake with coffee, with energy drinks, with sheer willpower. Because every time she closes her eyes, she has the same dream. She's walking through the house, but it's different. The walls are wrong, the rooms arranged differently, and there are people, figures in old-fashioned clothing, standing in doorways, watching her with expressions she can't read. They never speak in the dream. They just watch and point upward, toward the 3rd floor. Elizabeth hasn't been to the 3rd floor since she moved in. Something about it makes her skin crawl. The temperature drops 20 degrees up there. The air feels thick, wrong. But in the dream, they keep pointing, insistent, demanding she go up. She woke yesterday to find muddy footprints in her bedroom, barefoot, human-sized, leading from the door to her bed and back out again. All the doors were still locked. Something had been in her room while she slept, had stood beside her bed, and left. Elizabeth is writing this now at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. She sent it to a friend, another historian she trusts, with instructions to publish it if she doesn't check in within 48 hours, because she's decided to go to the 3rd floor, to face whatever is up there. She needs to know if this is real or if she's losing her mind. She needs to know if houses can really be haunted, or if the past can refuse to stay buried, or if some places are just wrong in ways that can't be explained by architecture and history. The knocking has started again, even though it's daylight, even though she's wide awake. It's coming from upstairs, from the third floor. 3 deliberate knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. It's calling her, summoning her. Elizabeth is going to answer. She's taking this laptop with her. She's going to document whatever is up there. If her friend is reading this, it means Elizabeth didn't check in. It means something happened on the 3rd floor. She's going now. The knocking is getting louder, more insistent. She just wants to understand. That's all she's ever wanted, to understand the past, to make sense of history. The door at the base of the 3rd floor stairs is open. She didn't open it. It's been locked since she moved in. The knocking is coming from directly above. She's climbing the stairs now. Each step is colder than the last. Her breath is fogging in the air, even though it's May. There's a light up here. She didn't turn it on. The 3rd floor has never had working electricity. She can see a door at the end of the hallway. It's the only one open. The knocking is coming from inside. 3 knocks. She's at the door now. She's going to look inside. She has to know.